Very pleased to welcome to the GS podcast, Mike Bigelow. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. You're in China at the moment. What time is it there, if you could just remind me?
It is almost exactly 4 o'clock in the morning.
That is commitment to the spoken word medium.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm pleased to have you on the podcast. You've got a very unique story and an experience that I've got plenty of questions to delve into. You're a former Jehovah's Witness elder for 18 years, I believe. But, I mean, I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing before then. How much of a role did this faith play in your childhood?
Well, it was a big part of my childhood. I was born in 1961 into a large extended family of Jehovah's Witnesses. So my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my older sisters and brother, they were all witnesses, and they were really zealous witnesses. I was raised in San Diego, and we had a great family life. I was the fourth of 6 kids, and my parents were very caring people. My dad was a hard worker. He was a great provider, and even though he spent a lot of time on congregation things or church things, I guess we could say. Jehovah's Witnesses don't call their groups churches. He always made time for us as a family. He would study the Bible with us. He'd play with us. He'd take us to Balboa Park. He'd take us camping in the mountains and deserts around San Diego. And even though my mom was always busy trying to find more opportunities to go out in the evangelizing work, she took good care of us too. I had sort of a classic Christian moral upbringing, taught the value of hard work. And when you're a young person growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, your life is pretty insulated. I had a small circle of Jehovah's Witness friends. Even as a young person, you're busy going to several meetings a week. You're out knocking on people's doors on the weekend. So this sort of odd lifestyle becomes normal. And I'm a firm believer that people seek happiness out of whatever circumstances they're in. And I think I did that. So mostly I had a great upbringing, and I thank my parents for that. There's a flip side to that. When you're a Jehovah's Witness kid, certainly by the time you get into school, you realize that you're an outsider. You don't have any friends or any activities outside the group. There's no school sports, there's no drama club, there's no band practice, there's no Boy Scouts or anything like that. You're the odd kid out who doesn't salute the flag, who doesn't go to birthday parties, who doesn't celebrate holidays. And in addition to that, witness kids have sort of a universal terror about going out in the preaching work in their own neighborhoods, because no matter how you face it, it's just not cool to show up on your classmate's doorstep, say at the age of 9 or 10, wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase, and then telling your schoolmates' parents that unless they change their religion, pretty soon God may kill them.
Beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And in the 60s, it was actually even worse than that, because in the 60s, the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses was telling people that in 1975, in all likelihood, Armageddon was going to come. So in the 60s, when I was growing up, we were very much viewed as a doomsday cult.
All right, I mean, how do you sell that kind of thing? I mean, is it a case, I mean, what can you offer in the face of this? You're basically knocking on doors, telling people that the world's going to end. Is it just as a chance to repent? Is that the main thrust of the conversation?
That's a big part of it. But typically what happens when you knock on somebody's door, you present the easy things, like, wouldn't it be nice to have a happier family life? Or wouldn't it be nice to have clean living, because witnesses don't smoke and they're moderate drinkers and things like that. So they use sort of a happy family life and peace with God as the hook to get you interested in the message according to Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not easy, but there are people who are disenfranchised with their own church that end up converting and becoming witnesses.
Like you said, this was a sort of a little bit of an insular environment. When did you really start to notice maybe this wasn't the norm compared to other kids your age?
Certainly in elementary school. In elementary school, you try to fit in with kids, but then they realize that if they invite you to go to their house after school, you won't go. If they have a birthday party, you have to explain, no, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's only two birthday parties in the Bible, and at these two birthday parties, people got their heads cut off. So, so you realize pretty soon, pretty early on, that you've really got to stick to yourself.
Okay, I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about doctrine and how it really differs from the sort of garden variety version of Christianity that most of us are probably more familiar with. What are some of the dogmas, some of the well-known dogmas of the Jehovah's Witness Church, and how exactly are they explained away from the Bible?
Well, probably initially, one of the things that stands out is that they're non-Trinitarian, which I realize there are a few non-Trinitarian Christian churches out there. So they teach that Jehovah is God and that He has existed forever. He's a creator without beginning, and forever He was essentially alone in the universe. And then He decided to create Jesus, and then between Jehovah and Jesus, the two of them went on to create everything else. And then, the third aspect of the Trinity in other churches is the Holy Spirit. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the Holy Spirit is the power that Jehovah and Jesus use to get things done. They're a fundamentalist church that hates to be called fundamentalists. They like to make a distinction that they don't argue about the age of the earth or about the age of the universe, because those creative days in Genesis, they use a day-age understanding. So they say that those individual days could be epochs or eons long. So they don't argue about the age of the earth. But they're very much fundamentalists because they say that humans were created in the year 4024 BC. So that's very similar to other fundamentalist churches. They teach that animals and humans were created as vegetarians, and that domestic animals were created as domestic animals, not gradually domesticated by humans. They teach that Earth's climate was stable and uniformly warm and tropical before the flood of Noah's day. They do cling to the historicity of a literal flood. They teach that about 4,400 years ago, the whole planet, including all its mountains, were underwater. And in fact, they have a publication that says very specifically that the Earth's polar caps, deep ocean trenches, and high mountains all formed after the flood of Noah's day. They talk about the Stone Age, and when they talk about the Stone Age, all of that, they say, happened after the flood of Noah's day. If you find Stone Age tools in Australia or in Northern Europe, that's because people just ran away after the flood and took their Stone Age technology with them.
Sure. I mean, am I right in thinking that the church doesn't have a sort of concept of hell? That's not something they really push.
No, they don't. They teach that hell is a misinterpretation of the word grave. They teach that the condition of a dead person is like when you see an animal hit on the road. That you're gone. It's over, and the only place you exist is in God's memory. So they will quote scriptures that say the wages of sin is death, not eternal punishment. So they don't believe in hell.
I mean, how old was you again when you was going door to door?
The first time I remember placing the Watchtower and Awake magazines, I was 4 years old. I remember it real clearly. It was a red house. It was a house that didn't have a porch, and the man was delighted with my little presentation, and he took the magazines.
Can you think of any less than positive experiences then?
Yeah. I was I was out in the ministry with one of my two sons, and a woman answered the door, and she just almost in a screaming terror told my son to basically run for his life. Get out now, do anything you can to resist your parents. They're going to destroy your life. That was about as bad as it got. I had friends who in northern New England, everybody has guns in the United States, and there are several times where people would bring guns to the door and say, get out, don't come back, that kind of thing.
Do you think this was coming from just hostility from other Christians, or just people who are irreligious in general? I don't know if there's much way you can really gauge that kind of thing.
It's hard to say, but now being able to reflect back on it, I think, generally speaking, in fact, to a very large degree, when you go out in the door-to-door work, people are very kind because they know what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and they could say, you're nuts. You teach things that are provably false, and yet you're still coming to my door year after year after year. Most of them are very polite. They say, thank you, I'm not interested, and that's it. So, that's one of the things that leads me to believe that people are genuinely good, is that they can put up with Jehovah's Witnesses coming to their doors over and over again for so long.
I don't suppose, did you ever have any home visits from Mormons or anything like that? I was just wondering how you'd react yourself to somebody, like when you was in the church, somebody knocking on your door trying to peddle a different denomination. Would it be like a conversion off, maybe?
For me personally, we had Mormons come to our door once when we lived in Taiwan. And I engaged them in conversation for a little while. I was polite, but at the time I didn't know anything about Mormonism.
Just like Mormons then.
Yeah. So it was me kind of picking their brains rather than saying, "Hey, wait a minute, do you really believe that Joseph Smith put his face into a hat and read a magic stone so that he could have more than one wife?"
It's still funny whenever I hear it out aloud.
It is, but I've decided if I ran into Mormons today, I wouldn't do that. It's why rub it in their face? Because they know what their religion teaches and what it's based on, and I think they're just trying to get through the 2 years so they can go to college and start having a real life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always friendly. There's been few occasions when I bumped into them, and they're all 19-year-old young lads, and I have a bit of sympathy, really, because it's not fair, it's not their fault, and I try and make some time, and I try and avoid the religious talk, to be honest. Whenever they open dialogue with me, I start asking them whereabouts they're from in America, and try and get a bit of information about the home life, and just be friendly and nice, but it worries me how much they're missing out on by spreading this false gospel when they should be doing things that young 19-year-old boys do.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you was deprived? I mean, I know you said your parents did a great job, and you had a happy childhood. I think I think you're right when you say I think people try and find happiness in any situation where they can. But looking back, do you feel like you were deprived of anything?
Well, I was taught something that's false, provably false. But if I think back to my grandparents, should my grandparents have known that the natural history that Jehovah's Witnesses profess is untrue, I could make a case that it would be reasonable for them to say the earth is only 6,000 years old, or humans have only been on the earth for 6,000 years, and maybe there was a global flood. Because you're talking about the 1930s. And then move forward to the 1950s and 60s when my parents were having kids. Still, no internet. A lot of sciences weren't developed to the degree that they are today. So I can't say that I blame my father or my parents for teaching me these things that are now false. But for me to teach them to my own kids, I should have known better. Because by the 90s, mid-90s, there was the internet, and I should have been asking questions that I didn't start asking until probably 10 years later. So I certainly do give my parents a pass, but I don't give myself a pass. In homeschooling our own two kids, I certainly deprived them of the opportunity to weigh the natural world's evidence and determine if what I was teaching them was true or not.
Okay, I mean, I do want to pick up on your family dynamic as it was and how it is just a little bit later if you're comfortable speaking about that. But I thought maybe what I found really interesting in some of the information you sent me about your experiences and how you sort of transitioned to a more skeptical outlook on life was the way in which it occurred. I mean, it was a purely self-driven event. It was related very closely to nature. I mean, I was wondering if you could give us a description of what your thought process was when you started having doubts.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people that have left religions, and I'm the only person I know that left this way. Certainly, I always had doubts. I think everybody that's in any faith has doubts about some particular parts of it. One of mine related very much to natural disasters. And I'm not talking about the classic problem of evil, because a lot of times when you talk about evil, people or religious apologists quickly try to get away from the evil that the planet does and get onto the one where they blame people and say, well, yeah, people are terrible to each other, and that's because of the fall from sin or fall from grace. But mine was very much focused on the damage that the earth does. I just couldn't come to grips with the existence of natural processes on the earth that kill people. When you do research on natural disasters, which I had done, you find out that people's susceptibility to natural disasters depends on a combination of chance, of where they live, of what their economic circumstances are, of the geology where they live. Trust in God or faith in God just isn't a factor. It doesn't matter if it's a lightning strike that hits some poor school in Africa that has a metal roof and 10 kids die, or if it's an earthquake that wipes out 300,000 people. I was never at ease with that. It never made sense to me that a loving God would allow such things. So what I've identified as the defining time or the defining point when I really started to sort of disintegrate as a spiritual person, I guess you could say, was on December 26th of 2004, when that terrible earthquake and tsunami hit the Indian Ocean. I recall one particular piece of videotape where they were panning across a big beach, and it was strewn with bodies. But there was one image that they did a bit of a close-up on, and it was a female, and she was in rigor mortis. She was already sort of a dark bluish color. And she was on her back, and her arms were sort of stretched out towards the heavens. Now, I'm not saying she died begging God why or asking the question why, but when I saw that image, that was the impact it had on me. So on the day of that Indonesian disaster, I formed a very simple equation in my head and then acted on it. I reasoned that either God caused that to happen or he allowed it to happen. See, I could only think of those two options. And I decided then and there that if there is a God, I don't want to be his friend. I don't want to live on a planet with him as a supreme ruler. So from that day forward, I'm very clear on this point. I never uttered another personal prayer. So that was one thing that was going on. But at the same time that was going on, geology was picking away at my faith as well. If you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, when you look at any landform, anywhere, if you're flying over something or if you're driving past something, it doesn't matter if it's a mountain or a meadow or a hill or a beach, you have in your mind a very simple, basic understanding. Your understanding is that either this was underwater 4,400 years ago, or it was formed in the last 4,400 years. That is a universal understanding according to Jehovah's Witnesses, any landform. Well, as far back as the mid-1980s, I had been leading climbing and backpacking trips into the backcountry of California's Sierra Nevada mountains. And I still do this. I have spent collective months in those mountains. And the more time I spent there looking at the geology, looking at those very young, fractured, sharply defined mountains, something just stuck in my head and say, you're not looking at this whole picture, Mike. It just seemed impossible to me to look at those mountains and believe the Watchtower's account of natural history. And the thing that really set me going was the fact that there are living glaciers in the Sierras today. But there's also evidence that great glaciers in the past both advanced down the slopes of those mountains and retreated and then advanced again. So again, according to this Jehovah's Witnesses default geology position, when you look at the remnants of extinct glaciers, it makes you wonder, how could this possibly have happened in the last 4,400 years? So up until around 2005 or 2006, every time I visited the mountains, it felt like I was missing something really important. And it finally clicked into place. I think it was either 2005 or 2006. There's this one particular town in California that has a really vast network of extinct glacial remains flowing down right into the desert floor. And the first time I saw that town using Google Earth, it just stunned me, because you could see very plainly the tract of this glacier that I now know, was from 100,000 years ago or so. And when I saw that, it really shook me, because you can't look at something like that and still hold to this 4,400 years ago this was underwater, or 4,400 years ago this started to be created. So I started looking at other mountainous areas throughout the Sierra Range using Google Earth, and I found dozens of other empty glacial moraines. So then I started looking at the Rockies in the United States and Alaska and Patagonia down in South America and the Alps in New Zealand, and all of them have the same thing. So from what I was seeing in the field and from satellite images Earth-wide, it seemed like the Earth's mountains and the glacial history of the Earth was just irreconcilable with this flood geology teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses. I had to admit that there was no way that the glacial sculpting of the Sierra Mountains or Earth's other great ranges happened over the last 400 or 4,400 years. So I started studying really specifically what the witnesses said about these things, what Jehovah's Witnesses taught about the climate, about ice ages, which is particularly disturbing, because I remember as a kid, my parents and my uncle just laughing it up over the fact that ice ages never happened, just absolutely never happened. And all I found in Watchtower publications was misleading quotes, data mining, just classic propaganda tools, and tons of circular reasoning. They would just use the Bible to confirm the Bible, and not even recognize that's not how research works. For example, they'd say, "Are you going to trust your own human reasoning, which is a product of Satan's world, or are you going to trust the Bible?" Because think about it, Moses and Isaiah and Jesus and the Apostle Paul and Peter, they all speak about Bible history and the flood of Noah's day as being real. So who are you to question it? So you have people in the Bible verifying that the Bible is true. Who am I to question these things? Really nobody. I'm just a factory manager who never went to college. But if I was discovering these things, then I figured probably other people had discovered them too, and there had to be other things that I was just wrong about. I was just wrong.
I think that's such an interesting way of casting doubt on yourself or what you believe. But I mean, there's something in this as well. I mean, what's the difference between somebody like yourself who sees this beautiful, landscape and assumes that there's something not quite right that you're missing, and the difference between that and somebody so indoctrinated in a certain ideological faith-based narrative that they just assume this just reinforces God or just reinforces what they believe. How can you see something different from them, do you think? Do you think there was maybe a seed of doubt before that?
I think it probably had to be, because I know people that have made that drive with me from Las Vegas over to the eastern slopes of the Sierras, that in plate tectonics and in sort of the twisted formations that you see in rocks, they see God's hand. But they've never studied plate tectonics. They don't understand the immense amount of time that it takes to build a mountain. And I don't have an answer to that. I think there's places where you will not let your mind go until something happens. And for me, it was a combination of recognizing that there was this empty circular trench where a glacier used to be, and the thousands and thousands of years that it took for that to happen, combined with this natural disaster thing that kind of woke me up from the Indonesian earthquake. So I attribute those two as much to anything, almost like being slapped in the face. Why that doesn't happen with other people, I don't know. I can't say.
Right, and you spent quite some time still in the pulpit, either going through these doubts or as an atheist. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, without question, those were the hardest years of my life, because I knew I was being dishonest, but on the other hand, I knew that I was helping people, because when I served as an elder, starting in the 90s, I believed it, and people told me that I was a good minister, I was a good preacher. When people had personal problems, I was a good personal shepherd. So when you see that you really are helping people, and the last congregation that I was responsible for was one in Macau, which was filled with very sincere young Filipino people who were working as domestic servants in Macau. And they needed my help. They prospered from my help. And I just couldn't bring myself, as soon as I realized that I no longer had faith that God existed, to just, kind of wash my hands and say, I'm going home, see you later. It took a long time and a lot of pain on my part to see that eventually I had to find a way out. So between, say, 2006 and 2009, that was the time period where I was what you could refer to as an atheist in the pulpit, where I was still preaching and teaching at weekly meetings and trying to help people, knowing that the help that I was giving them was probably nothing better than a placebo, but it made these people happy, so I stuck with it until finally I couldn't do it anymore, and I didn't know how to get out. So actually I typed into Google how to get out from being an elder in Jehovah's Witnesses, and one person had circumstances similar to mine. He said, just write a letter, tell them that the reasons are personal, and demand privacy. And that's what I did. It's very rare for an elder just to say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Typically, it's a position that you have for life. Your responsibilities are gradually reduced as you get older and older. But usually when people stop being elders, it's because they crashed their life and they did something that would get them or that would make them subject to the congregation's judicial process.
And had you heard of, say, the Clergy Project at that time or anything similar? I mean, I know there's not really a vast support network, but I think that's one thing that's become quite well known the last few years at least.
As soon as I found out about it, I called them and signed up. But like I said, my process was really backwards. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as this new atheist movement until probably 2008. And then I started reading. I read Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris and Dennett. And I think it was shortly after I started reading some of Richard Dawkins' work that I heard about the Clergy Project. So I called them and they interviewed me, and they were really supportive. And they put my name on the list, but they said, I got to be straight with you, Mike. He said, we don't have other Jehovah's Witnesses that are in your situation. And if we have any, we'll certainly have them get in touch with you. But they're good people. They're running a good project there. But because of the lack of other people in circumstances similar to me, I didn't get a lot of support from them, other than the fact that, I knew that they were kind of pulling for me and helping me work through the process emotionally and mentally.
I mean, there's one thing I've noticed as well. I mean, I never doubt ex-preachers. I accept they believe the things they professed to when they was preaching. But I would imagine, I mean, well, I don't want to speak for you as such, but is there people within the church now who will throw out the old excuse that maybe you just never really truly believe these things?
The only person, I don't want to get too specific, the only people that have done that are people who reacted out of real deep pain when I told my family that I had left the organization. The people in Macau are, I mean, they're almost pleading with my wife to, have faith that, through her good works and her kindness that eventually I'll come back. So on this side of the earth, on the Asian side of the earth, I haven't heard a whisper of that. But using the no true Scotsman fallacy, I did get a little bit of that back from home. The implication that I never could have been a true Christian if I left this way.
How do you feel about it now? I mean, your family situation's a bit precarious. I mean, I don't know how much you want to speak about this or how open you want to be, but I believe your wife's still in very closely tied to the church. Your sons are as well, and obviously your parents are still with us, are they?
Yes, they are. Yep. It's difficult, and I feel bad for my family because I know how they view me. They view it as though I have died and in all likelihood have no opportunity to be resurrected or to ever be with them. So it's almost worse than a real death in their mind. And I can't imagine how much that hurts them. And the fact that they feel this pain makes me feel bad. But it makes me feel bad that there is an organization that would perpetuate those beliefs so that they held them so tightly that, for example, my two sons wouldn't answer the phone if I called. As far as my wife goes, strangely enough, we have a really good relationship. We've been married for almost 35 years. Going through this process was very difficult for her. But she loves me and I love her, and we're making this work. There's very little that we talk about when it comes to religion or geology or natural history. So we have definite bounds of where we don't go, but our relationship's good. So that part of it's nice. But the fact that I don't have any relationship with my parents, or my two sons, or my brothers and sisters back in the States, yeah, it's sad. But there's a lot of things that are really happy in my life. I'm active in the skeptical community here in Hong Kong, and I've learned how to make friends, which is something that as one of Jehovah's Witnesses you never have to learn, because everybody in your congregation is like an instant friend. So there's a lot of things that I have to be happy and glad about now. So I think my sadness is over having lost family, but knowing that they view it as almost like I'm irretrievably gone is I'm sure that's a very hard pain for them to endure.
Yeah, it sounds really tough. Thank you for sharing that as well. But I mean, it sounds like you're managing to keep a level head about it as well, which is impressive. Tell us a little bit about the skeptical community in China. How does that work? What are the main issues that they're interested in?
It's interesting. Chinese people believe in the spirit of qi, which is, it's sort of like an invisible force inside you.
Sounds painful.
Well, they're convinced that qi can be manipulated in various ways. Like you've heard of feng shui,
yes,
which is how you align different things in your home or when you're building a house. Part of that is to control the qi in the home. Acupuncture is very much related to qi. So there's things that Chinese people accept as real that we kind of say, well, we don't know what qi is, we don't think it exists, or we don't believe that there's these meridians that you can touch with needles to affect good health. But on the other hand, Chinese people are much more rational when it comes to religion. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to get a Chinese person to believe that humans have only been on the earth for 6,000 years. So, and like vaccinations, Chinese people, they have no time for this "I'm not going to vaccinate my kid" thing. The government says you get vaccinated, and that's the right thing to do when you get vaccinated. Our skeptical group in Hong Kong, in fact, we had a skeptics in the pub last night, which I went to, and it was a mix of probably 50% Westerners from Canada and the United States, and then the rest were just local Chinese, local Hong Kong people.
How's the language barrier?
It's not bad because Hong Kong, you start learning English, I think in primary school. So most young Hong Kongers can speak English very fluently, and then they also speak Cantonese. We don't do any foreign language in the Skeptics in the Pub. Our presentations, our talks are always in English. We had the first Skeptics in the Pub in Dongguan, which is just maybe half an hour from my apartment here, and we had Rebecca Watson come over, with the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. She came over in October, and she did 2 talks in Hong Kong, and then we brought her into China for a day and drove her around here, and showed her some of the, more interesting parts of rural China. And then we had a nice presentation at a pub on Friday night while she was here. So it's a good group of people, but the skeptics, the big draw is still the classic skeptical things, UFOs, anti-vax, acupuncture, global warming,
yeah, medicine,
yeah.
Ghosts.
Yep.
They make an appearance.
We haven't done anything on ghosts. We're thinking about doing a few that we've got coming up. We're going to do we're going to do one called the demarcation problem, which will be a discussion that defines where science ends and pseudoscience starts. And we've got another one coming up on religion, which we mix in religion a little bit, not a lot. I did a presentation. The last presentation I did was last summer, and it was on flood geology. And in that one, the author, David Montgomery, actually did a video introduction for us because I featured his book in my presentation. And that was fun. That was nice. And I think we're going to do something on spontaneous human combustion coming up here pretty soon too. So that'll be fun.
This sounds excellent. If I'm ever in China, I think that'll be my first port of call. And you've managed to conflate 2 things really there that are favourites of mine. Not only is the pub, there's skepticism as well.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. We'd love to have you here. You can tell us about your podcast, and we'll fill a room, and I can bring you into China, and you can see how crazy it is here too.
Sounds awesome. I will just check Twitter. I believe I've got some good questions for you. Many of them were basically people working out the grievances about having the door knocked on, which I think they wanted me to vent their frustration in your direction. So
sure.
We'll just skid past those. But I mean, Anecdotally, where I live now, and I believe this is wider UK, the Jehovah's Witnesses have sort of stopped knocking on doors as an evangelical tactic. It's more standing outside train stations and bus stops and just holding the paraphernalia and just waiting for people to approach them rather than the other way around. I don't know if you're familiar with this change in tactic or know anything about it.
Yeah, I do. Actually, that started. They started sort of talking about that in the years when I was sort of exiting. I stopped being an elder in 2009, and then I formally left the organization, or resigned from the organization, I guess you could say, in 2012. And during those years, I could see that they were starting to come up with sort of what our literature stands. And I've seen them in airports, you see them in public parks, and it's probably just as effective as knocking on people's doors, because people have figured out you just don't answer the door. People are irritated by it, and more what we were finding and what I heard people complaining about is that they would knock on the door and just nobody would show up. I mean, you'd see them inside watching TV or reading to their kids, and they just wouldn't answer the door. So that, combined with the fact that usually people aren't at home during the hours that witnesses like to preach, going door to door and knocking, it's still a mainstay because it's a work that's scripturally required, but it's not that effective. I think the evidence over the years demonstrates the fact that particularly in Western countries, they're having a hard time to generate any growth at all. The real growth in the organization is coming from places where it's poor and places where probably the internet is not that ubiquitous. So the door-to-door thing, I don't think it's going to disappear, but you are going to see them relying more on literature carts with people standing, waiting to be approached, more so than the door-to-door work, because people just don't answer the doors.
I suppose Scientology's got Tom Cruise, Jehovah's Witnesses. They had Prince. Who's got it worse there, do you think?
I wouldn't want to be Tom Cruise. Boy, he's taken a beating over the Scientology thing, particularly with this new movie that's coming out on HBO.
What is this movie? I think I saw a link to it today, and it's the first I've heard of it. It's sort of an expository documentary type deal.
Yes, it is. And if you read, I don't remember where I saw the story today, but it's getting real good reviews. It was in USA Today. If you go to USA Today, you'll see that there's a blurb about the movie.
Can you remember what it's called?
I don't remember the name of the movie, but if you just type in Scientology movie, you'll find it real quickly. But it sounds like HBO just spent a fortune on lawyers to make sure that they were not going to get sued to pieces by Scientology, because Scientology as a group does have a lot of money, and they do like to sue people. Jehovah's Witnesses don't really have anything like that. If you're a famous person that becomes one of Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of times they just they fade quietly into the night from the public eye. There's always rumors about so and so that became a witness, like the tennis stars, the Williams sisters. We've always heard rumors that they were witnesses, but I can't think of anybody else really. Michael Jackson for a while. But yeah, not too many celebrities are Jehovah's Witnesses.
They haven't got the time for all that door knocking, I think that's the issue. This documentary, thanks to my amazing Googling capabilities, is called Going Clear. So yeah, that's going to be on HBO, so I'll look out for that, or I'll certainly download it illegally.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to encourage that. I mean, we live in Pirate Central here in Asia, and I love iTunes because I like to buy things legally, and we can get things pretty quickly. In fact, that movie, The Interview, I downloaded it first from a torrent site and just absolutely loved it. But then as soon as it came up on iTunes, I bought a copy of it because I just,
I'm the same. I absolutely love movies, and I like the sense of ownership as well. So if there's a movie that I really enjoy, I have to have a physical copy of it in the house. I'm not sure what it is. It's maybe part kleptomania on my part.
So, Could be.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions to get through for you. Some are great, actually. Gareth Molyneux's asked, has the constant door-to-door rejection helped in the real world, like with job interviews and such? So has it helped manage your expectations in terms of rejection, I suppose?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you something, that there is a collateral benefit to knocking on people's doors and being rejected, because it teaches you to not think too much of yourself. And it does teach you to deal with nervousness, because you got to imagine when you're a 10-year-old kid knocking on somebody's door, expecting that whoever answers is probably going to be in a bad mood, and you still have a smile on your face and still get through a presentation. And sometimes, lo and behold, they will accept a Watchtower magazine from you. So, actually, I think there is probably some positive benefits that come from training yourself to knock on people's doors. Yeah.
Did you have a script down? Did you sort of approach it differently depending on the facial expressions of the person at the door or the age group? Had you worked on one solid pitch, or did you vary it?
You are very much trained to vary it. Now, young people, we're going to have a short, prepared, memorized script, but then at the meetings, one of the key focuses is to teach you how to be a good preacher. And some of the techniques that they teach you are almost identical to sales techniques, to overcome objections, to look in the person's yard and see if they have kids' toys and try to appeal to them. Oh, I notice you probably have young children. Have you ever wondered what the future is going to be like for them?
Appeal to emotion.
Boy, that just sounds so natural, flowing off my tongue. I haven't done that in a long time.
I was ready to sign over then. That was excellent. I don't even have any kids. Plenty of toys in the garden. No kids, though.
Yeah.
Nick Ryder has asked, how did they, I'm assuming Jehovah's Witness, justify not allowing blood transfusions in cases of life or death?
That's a real tough one to understand. There's a scripture in the New Testament that says that we are to abstain from blood. Now, in the context, the Apostle Paul, I believe it was referring to meat that had not been bled properly. Of course, there was a long-standing prohibition against eating blood in the Old Testament. God told Adam to pour the blood out. He told Noah to pour the blood out, not eat blood. The Israelites were commanded to not eat blood.
So I suppose this is where kosher meat makes its way into culture, I suppose.
Yeah, I would imagine so, yes. But how that made the jump into a medical procedure that there's no way the Apostle Paul could have even known was going to happen just doesn't make sense, especially given the fact that Jesus once said, or is recorded to have said, that we should be willing to die for our neighbor. So one of the things that's kind of, and I never thought of this until after I left the organization, but it's sort of a requirement on my part to extend my life for my neighbor or even for a stranger. So that would involve me spending every drop of blood in exchange for somebody else's life. And yet, to give them a pint of blood to save their life is something that you can't do. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's entirely based on the long-standing prohibition against eating blood. And they say, if a doctor told you not to drink, would you inject the booze into your arm instead? Of course you wouldn't. So that's the reason for the position. I think they're unique in Christendom for adopting that position.
Right. I've got a question from David James. He's noted that Jehovah's Witnesses are typically forbidden from reading non-Jehovah's Witness literature. You can't quite understand how that doesn't ring alarm bells. And what's the best way to converse with a Jehovah's Witness given this? Could anyone external have convinced you, do you think? Or do you think this is a thing that you had to do, find out for yourself?
It's hard to know, because I do a lot of reading today, and there's some books that don't even really attack religion, but that really promote critical thinking. And I think that's going to be the real difficulty for the Watchtower organization as the years go by. People are learning to think critically. People are learning to be skeptical. And people have the internet. So even though they may not buy a book, they have access to a lot of information. Witnesses they're encouraged not to go to universities to get a general education in university. They're trained in high school to try to figure out how they're going to use their education to make a living. So it's very much focused towards the trades and a specific skill. So that keeps a lot of young people from focusing on things like philosophy or geology or the Stone Age or topics that are really going to find them in direct conflict with the witnesses. I think that's a fight that's going to get harder and harder for the witnesses to fight, because you can't keep information down these days, and human technology is just advancing exponentially. One of the things that I'm curious about is what's going to happen if they really find microbial life on Mars. How are religious people going to deal with that? And that very well could happen, in the next few years. So you can't keep information down, and I think Jehovah's Witnesses are going to struggle with that.
That's it's funny you should say that. That's the one thing I'd like to see before I shuffled off. Just life on a different planet. I'm not talking Green Men or Independence Day or anything like that. Just a microbe or even a fossil of something, I think could completely blow a lot of people's minds. But I suppose these people are so indoctrinated, I'd probably managed to explain it away anyway. I mean, I always thought that if tomorrow Zeus came down and announced himself as the one true God, there'd be no more atheists left on the planet. But we'd still have Christians, we'd still have Jews, we'd still have Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, etc.
Yep, you're right. It's hard to beat faith.
A chap called Sai Ko has asked, if only 144,000 are going to heaven to rule with Jesus, why do they try so hard to recruit more members?
Is he say, why did Jesus try to recruit more members, or why do we try to recruit more?
Jehovah's Witness. Why do they try to recruit, given there's only sort of a limited attendance, shall we say?
Well, because there are two hopes within Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Right now there's about 8 million witnesses on the earth, and they teach that 144,000 are going to heaven, but the rest of the people who are faithful servants of Jehovah are going to live forever on a restored paradise earth. So there's two potential hopes. They say that the people that are going to heaven receive a special calling that is very apparent to them, but that everybody else can plan on living forever on a paradise earth.
Okay, that answered that comprehensively. John Dickinson has said, can you ask about the whole not celebrating Christmas birthdays thing, please? He says he's genuinely interested.
Well, the birthday things they base it on the scriptures that the day of a person's death is better than the day of their birth. So, on the logical side, they're like, why would you celebrate your birth? Because your birthday is the date that you just got started. But then they also throw in the fact that there is only 2 birthdays mentioned in the Bible, and at both of those birthday parties, people had their heads cut off. And then they admit, of course, nobody gets their heads cut off at birthday parties today, but the lack of evidence of anybody in the Bible celebrating a birthday, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they take that as evidence that the early Christians didn't celebrate birthdays, and that it just sort of promotes a selfish me day. So that's why they don't celebrate birthdays. Christmas is sort of for the same reason. Jehovah's Witnesses approach Christmas the way even the Puritans did back 200 or 300 years ago. Christians celebrating Christmas is sort of a new thing. It's pretty widely accepted that early Christians didn't celebrate Christmas, that it kind of became a co-opted winter solstice and Jesus' birthday, kind of a fused thing back in the days of Constantine, I think. So that's why they don't celebrate Christmas.
I imagine when you left the church, you must have thought, well, at least I'll get presents. But then, given your family situation, that's probably not the case, is it?
No, I don't have any interest in celebrating Christmas, because nobody around me does, and it's so much connected to, I don't know, like commercialism and the religious side of it. I think I'd be hard pressed to ever end up being a Christmas celebrator. It's never been part of me, and the religious connotations are just a turn off for me. So I don't think that'll ever be part of my future.
Will Drasberry's asked, I have never heard a good reason why they don't have windows in their kingdom halls.
I was involved in a kingdom hall construction in the mid '80s, and in the '80s, kingdom halls were having problems with having little kids shoot BB gun pellets through the windows. So there was a lot of vandalism. So sort of as a directive, they said, when you build a new kingdom hall, let's build them without windows for a while. And that was pretty much the norm until fairly recently. I've seen maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, they've started to put windows in the buildings again. But it was merely for security. It wasn't anything related to their theology, just a security issue.
Okay, Mike, I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I think we've probably stretched our luck to the limits in terms of our cross-Asian internet connection. But I mean, where can people find these skeptical groups you're involved in? Do you have websites? Are they Facebook groups?
Yeah, we have 2 Facebook groups. We have Hong Kong Skeptics and Hong Kong Atheists. And one other thing that I wanted to add, if there's anybody who happens to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses that's listening and is in that place where they suspect that it's not true, or maybe they know it's not true and don't know what to do, they can look for me on Facebook too at Michael Bigelow, Macau, China. If they type that into Facebook, they'll find me, and I'd be happy to have an interchange with them.
Excellent. I'll include that in the information for this episode as well. I mean, have you ever considered setting up a Twitter account? Are you coming over to the dark side anytime soon?
Yeah, that I think I wrote you in one of my emails. I'm apparently a Luddite because I do not have Twitter. When we're in China, we have to use a VPN to use Facebook or any social media really to speak of, and I don't presume to think that I've got followers that would be too interested in what I have to say typically. So that I would say that's a possibility, but right now it's not a social media tool that I'm using. I'm using primarily Facebook.
Okay, well, if you decide to set one up before this podcast comes out, let me know, and I'll make sure I include a mention of it. But I've learned a lot, and it's been really interesting speaking to you, and I really wish you all the best with it.
Well, I've enjoyed it too. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to chat with you and your listeners.
A massive thanks to Mike Bigelow. Make sure you look him up on Facebook, like he suggested. And thank you very much for listening. Remember to leave a review in Stitcher, iTunes. If you haven't got either of them, just write it down and post it through people's letterboxes. I think we've all learned something here today.